The streets of Spanish Harlem never made promises, and Erik Estrada never expected any. Born into a world where cracked sidewalks met cracked homes, he carried the weight of a childhood shaped by absence and addiction. His mother, Carmen, sewed for long hours under dim light, while his father vanished into the shadows of heroin before Erik could form a memory of him. There was a moment, before fame, before Hollywood, when a boy watched a detective at his mother's side and saw a future worth chasing. But life would nudge him elsewhere, toward a stage he didn't seek, and a spotlight that both saved and scorched. When Erik stood under that first stage light, it wasn't ambition, it was escape. What followed was a journey tangled in typecasting, struggle, and an unrelenting fight to be seen for more than a stereotype. Each small victory came with its own cost, each moment of fame brushing against the scars of where he'd started. The world knew him as Ponch, all charm and ease, but behind the camera, there were bruises left by both motorcycles and misunderstandings. It wasn't always applause. Sometimes it was lawsuits. Sometimes silence. But even then, Erik kept showing up. Smiling, limping, surviving. The lights didn't always shine kindly, but he never turned away. He lived through the peaks with gratitude, and through the valleys with grit. There were moments when Hollywood doors closed, but others opened. Unexpected ones, far from the red carpet. In Mexico, he found a voice he didn't know he needed, even if the language was unfamiliar. In Indiana, he traded scripts for shifts, reenacting a role that had once been just pretend. On night patrols, under real stars instead of studio lights, he rediscovered something quietly profound. Later in Virginia he went deeper, into a darker world online, playing the part of a child to catch those who hunt them. There, fame meant nothing, and courage meant everything. His face, so familiar to millions, became both shield and burden. But still he stayed. His life became a story told in fragments. A People magazine cover, a courtroom headline, a home renovation show that handed out more than just nails and paint. There were smiles. And tears. Not all the endings were happy. Not all the beginnings were bright. But somehow, each thread wove something lasting. Sometimes, goodbye comes with gratitude. It ended, yes, but not without meaning. Erik Estrada's earliest memories weren't filled with cameras or stage lights. They were filled with silence, long pauses left behind by a father who disappeared into addiction, and the quiet labor of a mother who bore too much for one lifetime. Carmen Moreno worked her fingers raw to clothe others, while Erik grew up with holes not just in his shoes, but in his heart. His grandfather's love offered a brief shelter, a steady hand in a home too often marked by struggle. But when that steady hand faded with his grandfather's passing, Erik was just 10, and suddenly adrift again. His mother's relationship with a police detective, Pete Panos, gave him a new image of strength. That badge, that sense of purpose, it stirred something inside him. It was justice in the midst of disorder, order in a world where very little felt fair. Erik once wanted to wear a badge himself. But a twist of fate sent him toward a stage, all because of a high school crush. One choice for the wrong reason became the right path. Acting wasn't the dream, but it became the release. A chance to say things he couldn't in real life. A chance to be seen, for once, in full light. That light, though, came with shadows. His first role, the Frito Bandito, was a caricature, but for Erik, it was a foot in the door. He studied at the American Musical and Dramatic Academy, scraping by with odd jobs, leaning into the chance for something different. His breakthrough came with The Cross and the Switchblade, a role soaked in realism, drawn straight from the streets he knew too well. It was raw. It was honest. It was him. Yet Hollywood, with all its praise, had a narrow gaze. Roles offered to Erik were often steeped in cliché. The gangster, the sidekick, the stereotype. He fought that. Quietly. Stubbornly. Then, in 1977, everything shifted. Chips wasn't just another role. It was a revolution. As Officer Ponch, Erik didn't just entertain, he inspired. A Latino man in a heroic lead, smiling through sirens, breaking through expectations. He graced magazine covers, was named one of the sexiest bachelors, became a household name. But behind the scenes, the ride wasn't smooth. The fame came fast. The pressure came faster. And then came the crash. The motorcycle accident in 1979 was brutal, both physically and symbolically. The stunt gone wrong nearly ended him, but Erik got back up. He always did. He healed, returned, kept the smile on screen, but off-screen, a different storm brewed. He demanded what he believed he'd earned: better pay, a fair share of the profits. Instead, NBC replaced him. Bruce Jenner stepped into the role. Fans revolted. Letters poured in. Eventually, NBC brought Erik back, but something had shifted. His footing in the industry, once firm, had begun to wobble. And then came more pain, this time personal. His marriage to Joyce Miller collapsed in public view, accusations flying, reputations bruised. The courtroom became another battlefield. His second marriage brought children, moments of peace, but it too ended. It wasn't until his third marriage to Nanette Mirkovich that Erik found a kind of lasting calm. But the spotlight that had once followed him so eagerly began to drift away. Hollywood no longer called with the same enthusiasm. He had been a star, but now he had to find a new kind of light. In the 1990s, that light came from a place he hadn't expected: Mexico. Despite barely speaking the language, he starred in Dos Mujeres, Un Camino, a telenovela that broke records and opened new doors. It was more than success, it was connection. He reached a new audience, tapped into heritage, rebuilt something fractured. That role reminded Erik of who he was, and who he could still be. Years later, he stepped further from the screen and closer to the uniform he once dreamed of. At 59, he became a reserve officer in Indiana, quietly working midnight shifts. But anonymity didn't come easily. Too many people still recognized Ponch. So he moved on, this time to Virginia. There, Erik stepped into some of the darkest work of his life, posing online as a young girl to help catch predators. He became Kimmy, age 13 and a half, behind a screen and under constant threat. For 8 years, he carried that burden, knowing the stakes were real. It was not about fame anymore, it was about protecting others. This work, hidden from cameras, brought a different kind of reward. Something quieter. Something heavier. Something lasting. Erik Estrada's path had already veered through fame, failure, and reinvention. But it was what came next that revealed the deepest parts of him. After decades in the public eye, where charm had often been his armor, he entered a chapter where charisma wasn't enough. No longer just playing the role of a cop, he now wore the badge for real. It began in Indiana, where he took on reserve duties and tried to slip into the quiet role of midnight patrol. The streets were real, the risks no longer choreographed. But his face, so etched in pop culture, made anonymity impossible. Crowds formed. Drivers slowed down to stare. The uniform no longer disguised the man who had once been on every magazine rack. So he moved again, this time to Virginia, seeking less attention and more purpose. There, his mission became darker, more dangerous. He joined the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force, a unit known for emotionally punishing work. He slipped into the identity of Kimmy, a fictional 13-year-old girl, created to bait and capture online predators. It was not a role. It was a service, filled with risk, and built on quiet endurance. He logged into chat rooms. He waited. He listened. And when predators arrived, he helped take them down. Each day spent in this work required emotional restraint, but Erik carried a private motivation: his own experience as a father. He had seen what could happen. He knew the dangers weren't distant. They were close, immediate, everywhere. His past as a TV hero meant little here. Behind the screen, there were no scripts, no safety nets, only real consequences. The weight of pretending to be a child while knowing exactly who might be watching, what they might say, it wore down even the strongest. Still, Erik returned day after day, facing a different kind of spotlight, one not powered by fame, but by duty. He didn't talk much about this chapter. There were no celebrity interviews, no staged photo shoots. It was invisible labor. But those who worked alongside him saw what it took. He wasn't playing a part anymore. He had become the thing he once admired in Pete Ponos, a protector, quietly present in a world that rarely noticed the sacrifice. And when the hours ended, he didn't walk away with applause. Just the satisfaction that someone out there, some child, might be safer because of him. It wasn't flashy, but it mattered. That was enough. While Erik gave his energy to law enforcement, the public's memory of him shifted again. Not forgotten, but repurposed. He was still recognized, still approached, but now in whispers, with nostalgia, with careful words about chips. Fame had softened at the edges, But one battle still lingered: his image, manipulated by forces beyond his control. Deepfake scams began to circulate, using his likeness and voice in false endorsements. Videos appeared where his face sold products he'd never touched, speaking words he'd never said. It wasn't just embarrassing. It was invasive, a violation of everything he'd built. Erik fought back, using the same grit he brought to undercover work. He collaborated with federal authorities, reported frauds, and warned his followers. He refused to let technology erase his identity or rewrite his story. This, too, was a form of protection. Not for himself, but for those who still trusted him. It wasn't about reclaiming fame. It was about drawing a line, saying enough. In an era where anyone's face could be stolen, he stood as a voice, steady, experienced, and unwilling to fade quietly. And even as the industry moved on, and newer stars emerged, Erik held fast to what mattered. Away from the digital fights and the sting operations, he stepped into another unexpected space. Television, once again, but this time without the flash. Divine Renovation became his platform, a faith-based home improvement show designed not for ratings, but for restoration. Families in need were given more than just drywall and paint. They were given care, dignity, and a bit of hope. Erik served as the host, but more importantly, as a bridge between the struggles of his own past and the needs of others. The show won awards in 2024, recognized not just for craftsmanship, but for compassion. This was a quieter stage, one where the audience felt seen in a different way. There were no sirens, no stunts, just real homes, real people, and the slow work of healing. Yet, not all of Erik's later years were marked by peace. A long-standing feud with comedian George Lopez lingered in the background, a thread of tension born decades earlier on a chip set and dragged into public view. Insults were traded on stage. Interviews became battlegrounds. It never fully resolved. But Erik didn't dwell. His focus had shifted long ago, from being seen to seeing others. From being remembered, to remembering what mattered. Erik Estrada's journey didn't fade. It deepened. After years of flashing lights and scripted lines, his life slowed into something harder to define, yet easier to feel. He no longer lived through headlines or red carpet appearances. Instead, he stepped into spaces that demanded presence, not performance. Whether undercover online or renovating broken homes, he moved with quiet resolve. His work with the Safe Surfin' Foundation amplified this shift, advocating for child protection in a world increasingly difficult to navigate. What once was a chase for roles became a pursuit of purpose. His face, once plastered across billboards, now re-emerged in service announcements and safety campaigns. He stood where few stars stood, between public recognition and personal responsibility. The man once known as Ponch now spent his days in courtrooms, community centers, and quiet neighborhoods. There was no audience, no applause. But there was meaning. There were real people, real lives. And Erik showed up for them, again and again. His past never left him, but it no longer led him. It followed silently, like an old photograph in his wallet, reminding him of everything he'd survived. Some stories end in spotlight. Others end in stillness. For Erik, it was neither. His final chapters weren't drawn in bold strokes, but in careful lines, each shaped by experience, each carrying a weight he no longer needed to explain. His third marriage to Nanette Mirkovich brought a kind of quiet steadiness. Nearly 3 decades together had taught him a new rhythm, far from the noise of celebrity. There were no more roles to chase, no more images to uphold. He had faced the industry that once made him, and later overlooked him, with a grace few could maintain. Even in conflict, like his feud with George Lopez, he chose to continue forward rather than spiral back. The anger, though public, was never the full story. Behind it was a man too seasoned to let old wounds define his legacy. Instead, he focused on work that mattered, not to fans or followers, but to those whose names would never appear on a screen. Over time, even the pain held a place, woven gently into the narrative of resilience. His identity became not what he had done, but what he had endured. In the end, his life looked nothing like the script he once imagined, but that wasn't failure. It was transformation. He had played heroes on screen, but became something more off of it. Not flawless. Not unscathed. But deeply human. He carried the weight of early loss, of industry rejection, of personal breakdowns, and kept walking. The man who once chased fame found peace in anonymity. The child abandoned by a father became the adult who protected children from strangers. Each chapter turned with difficulty, but none without meaning. He had been loved, hated, praised, and forgotten. And still, he kept choosing paths that led him closer to something real. When deepfakes tried to distort his voice, he fought back. When families needed help, he showed up. And when justice called, quietly, without cameras, he answered. His story never needed embellishment. It already held enough. Erik Estrada may no longer be the face on every screen, but his presence remains, etched into the lives he's touched, the wrongs he's tried to right, and the legacy he continues to protect. His was not a life without pain, but it was one of persistence, of reinvention, of moments that broke and built in equal measure. There were smiles and tears. Sometimes, goodbye comes with gratitude. It ended, yes, but not without meaning.